Okay. Yes. Okay. Hello, everybody. So today I will describe in some detail the construction which allows to understand many features of the fractional quantum Hall effect, which is called the composite fermion theory. So I will first remind you very briefly what we achieved concerning the understanding of the integer quantum Hall effect, and what will be the strategy to understand the fractional case. So last time we claimed that there is a striking phenomenon, the integer quantum Hall effect, whose explanation requires essentially two ingredients. First, the presence of edge modes, and I have tried to describe you the Landauer-Buttiker picture of quantum transport in a Hall bar. And this is based on the fact that if you look at the Landau levels in a white bar, then there are almost degenerate states that correspond to the bulk Landau levels, and then the levels are rising with the position when you approach the edges. And in a simple one-body picture, you fill all these states with electrons. And then the whole conduction is due to the imbalance between the Fermi energies at each of these edges. So let me call mu the chemical potential. And this allows us to compute the whole conductance. So that's one fact. And then the other fact which is striking, so this has to do with the Hall resistance, Rxy. And then we need also something else, which is the presence of a gap in the system so that we can suppress dissipation. And that's related to the fact that the longitudinal resistance is essentially zero at low enough temperature. So this gap, it's the cyclotron gap in the case of the integer quantum Hall effect. So we have higher levels, let's see, that are empty. And this is the cyclotron gap that we can draw here on the bulk picture. So cyclotron gap h bar omega c in the bulk. And then another important ingredient that I have not yet mentioned is that if you look now at the edge states, so that's where the Fermi level is, then it's impossible to have dissipation because they are very far apart in real space. If you want to have backscattering, then it's clear that you have to cross the whole sample because the dispersion relation is such that one of the edge is left moving while the other edge is right moving. So that backscattering requires you to cross the sample, and the typical length scale of the interactions is set by the magnetic length, which is very small, much smaller than the distance between edges for realistic samples. So this separation between left and right means that there is essentially no longer any possibility to dissipate energy. The only thing you can do at a given edge, let me make a close-up picture, let's say of this edge, is that you have levels that are occupied, and you can make particle Hall excitations essentially limited to given edge. And that's because you expect that the wave functions have an extent given by the magnetic length, and the overlap between the wave functions across the sample then is exponentially suppressed. So there's no possibility for dissipation at the edge. And then concerning the bulk, all these guys are filled, and then there is a huge gap towards excited states. And since all these levels are filled, there is no possibility for dissipation. So this is really the main reason for this phenomenon, the appearance of zero longitudinal resistance. There is something I would like also to emphasize, is that don't think that this has anything to do with superconductivity. It doesn't mean that there is no dissipation in this phenomena. It just means that there is no dissipation along the edges. Because if you look at the sample, so that's a very naive drawing of a real sample. So this is the whole bar with the two-dimensional electron gases. And these are the contacts where you impose the current. So if I look at these edges, so there is the top edge which is flowing, let's say, to the right, and then the bottom edge is flowing to the left. In this picture, the chemical potential of these guys, it's the chemical potential of the left reservoir, while the chemical potential of the left moving bottom edge, then this is mu right, chemical potential of the right reservoir. So you see that there will be an imbalance of chemical potential only at 2 points, here and here, where the electrons along the edge will simply flow into the reservoir, and this happens only on 2 points. So in this mesoscopic picture, then you predict that dissipation will take place essentially on only 2 points, but nevertheless there is dissipation. So it's not a phenomenon like superconductivity. In the same way, if now instead of measuring the whole voltage, so you have to remember the whole voltage, it's defined between top and bottom edges like this, and the longitudinal voltage, you measure it here. So you measure longitudinal resistance but by looking at the voltage drop along the edge, and you find that this is 0. But then between the two reservoirs, between the contacts, there is a voltage drop, which is of course exactly the whole voltage. So there is a resistance in this phenomena. And the fact that the dissipation is taking place only at 2 points has been demonstrated in a very nice experiment made first in the group of von Klitzing, in which they just make a movie. They made a movie of the sample in the helium, in a bath of helium, and then you see that there are bubbles coming out exactly from the opposite corners of the sample. So it really shows you that there is heating of the helium on only 2 points and not on any other place in the sample. So that's really the mesoscopic understanding of this quantum Hall stuff. In addition to the nature of dissipation, there is also something which is very nice, is that's the realm of mesoscopic physics. It's possible to manipulate these edge states, for example, by adding gates, which are able to create an electrostatic potential, and then to change the path of the edge modes, and for example, to put them very close to each other in something which is called a quantum point contact. So let me reuse this picture. So if you add electric gates, I think I can draw such diagrams because apparently there is nobody from SPEC today. So, okay, and if you add some electrostatic potential, then you will simply make the edges flow much closer together, and then you can induce dissipation in the system, which means that by mesoscopic manipulations, you can in fact destroy the quantization. And as we know very well, the best way to understand the phenomenon is precisely by destroying it, because then you understand the limit of the phenomenon itself. So this is the realm of mesoscopic physics, which I will not discuss any longer. But then now, let's go back to the fractional quantum Hall stuff. Yes.
That you were saying.
Yes.
So the dissipation at these 2 points is caused by the coupling between the edge mode and the reservoir?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
It's not I mean, somehow, if I describe the edge mode, this
Right.
would be dissipation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The coupling together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now, okay, we know there is also a fractional quantum Hall effect, and it looks very similar. It looks very similar. This is the original picture by Tsui and Stormer, in the sense that there is also an absence of dissipation at low energy in the longitudinal mode. And of course, very likely it means that essentially the same mechanism is at work, which means that we want also to have edge modes. The simplest explanation would be that we have also edge modes able to carry the whole voltage. And we also need a gap. I will first discuss the appearance of the gap, because then now we know that it cannot be simply a one-body effect. Simply because in the fractional quantum Hall effect, we are in the case where the filling factor is a fraction, which means that we are at partial filling of a bulk Landau level. So in our one-body picture of the Landau levels broadened by disorder, let me draw something like this. We have extended and localized states, and then let this be the lowest Landau level. Nu smaller than 1 means that you are partially occupying this guy. So there is a huge density of states, no obvious gap in the one-body scheme, so the gap should be a many-body phenomenon. A direct proof of that is that, of course, in these experiments, the gap shows up as an activation law, so that you can measure this gap. And you can access its order of magnitude, and the order of magnitude is given by the Coulomb energy scale. And the Coulomb energy scale, so the Coulomb energy, it's E squared over R, divided by some permittivity constant, which is in gallium arsenide, it's of the order of 12, so it's not really unity. And so in the case of quantum Hall phenomena, we just replace the length by the magnetic length that we saw last time. So this gives us an energy scale, and this is the energy scale which is seen in this phenomenon. So it means that we have to understand what happens to partially filled states. Let me go a little bit forward. So that's the general experimental result on a sample with very high mobility, where we see that this fractional quantum Hall effect appears for many, many fractions, rational fractions, occupation of the Landau levels. Okay? So certainly, we see that this phenomenon appears when the filling factor is lower than 1, so this is nu equal 1. So beyond 10 Tesla, it means that we are in the partial filling of this lowest Landau level. But you see that, so nu equal 2, it's right here, maybe 5 Tesla. So between 1 and 2 Tesla, we see that there are also complex things that happen that have also to do with fractions. So this is something that we can understand in the following language. So let me draw the Landau levels. So if we are looking at nu smaller than 1, we are occupying only these states. If we have a filling which is between 1 and 2, we are occupying the second Landau level. I will forget the spin. I will discuss the spin next time, okay? And so on. So now the simple idea one can have is that imagine that, so this is completely filled, and now we look at the partial filling of the next Landau level, something like that. If this cyclotron gap is large enough, we can certainly try to make a theory in which we just project onto this level, this set of levels, okay? And there will be hopefully only small corrections, provided that this energy scale is much larger than the Coulomb energy scale. This is an approximation which is not too bad in the real world. If we are looking at the physics of the partial filling of these guys with respect to these guys, it means that we are changing the one-body wave functions. And if now we think in terms of doing some many-body calculations, it just means that we are slightly changing the matrix elements of the Hamiltonian, because we are slightly changing the wave functions. So it's equivalent to being in the lowest Landau level but just slightly tuning the interaction away from the pure Coulomb interaction. So if this change is not huge, we may imagine that we find copies of the fractional effects we find in the lowest Landau levels in the higher Landau levels. So this is at least partially true. I will discuss the breakdown of this picture in the last lecture. So for the time being, we'll concentrate essentially on what happens only in the lowest Landau level, and then we'll discuss deviations from this picture a bit later. So the most prominent fraction is the 1/3 that we briefly discussed last time. And we know that a lowest Landau level wave function should be a polynomial in the z coordinates of the n electrons times a universal Gaussian factor So strictly speaking, finding an eigenstate of the many body problem means finding a polynomial in the z coordinate. And I briefly told you that a very successful guess is the so-called Laughlin wave function, in which you decide to use this polynomial as a guess for the ground state wave function of the nu equals 1/3 filling factor. So I said that the Coulomb energy of this guy is great, but of course that's not enough. So once you have definite wave function, you can make measurements, and we can see that it's a liquid state by measuring the density and density correlations. So this is by numerical direct measurements from the wave function, it's a liquid state. But then the main ingredient that we have to find is the gap, which I mentioned before. So which means that we have to understand the excitations on top of this state. And there are two kinds of different excitations that we have to consider. First, it's the excitations at fixed number of particles or magnetic flux. And then there is also something else, is that, of course, it's important to understand what happens when you deviate from the magic filling 1/3, because after all, we see a plateau, which means that we should understand the excitations of the systems away from the magic filling factor if we are to understand why there is a plateau. So let me first go back to the simplest case of the wave function for the filling 1. In this case, I mentioned that if you construct the Slater determinant with all orbital fields, then the wave function right, yes. Thank you, Marco. Okay, well, it's much better. Okay. So I will omit this Gaussian factor because it's here all the time. It has nothing. It's just the general feature of the wave function. So that's the wave function of the filling factor unity. Okay. So now, what are the excited states that I can construct on top of this guy? Let me discuss the charge states, okay? So if we have a set of levels that are filled, then we can make holes, of course. So it's certainly easy to make a hole. Imagine that I make a hole at the center of the system. This is the symmetry gauge, okay? So that there is an origin of the coordinates, the origin of the z coordinates. So making a hole in this wave function, it's simply that I will not occupy the orbital whose formula is simply z to the power 0, okay? And then we occupy z1, z2, and so on. So it means that in the Vandermonde determinant, I just shift all the powers, which means that the wave function for the one whole state, it's simply obtained by taking this guy and multiplying by the product of all z coordinates. So this give me a state which has a charge +1 with respect to electrons, okay? And this charge is located right at the origin, okay? I cannot add an electron to this state simply because it's a completely filled orbital. But a natural question that I would like to understand concerning the filling factor 1/3 is how do I add a charge? How do I remove a charge? Okay? Or how do I add a flux quantum, or how do I remove a flux quantum? So after proposing the ground state wave function for the filling factor 1/3, then Laughlin proposed a very simple generalization of the whole by saying that let's use the same trick, let's use this factor, okay, onto now the Laughlin wave function. And the idea, as you see in the one-body language, is that you are simply pushing all particles away from the origin, so you create a depletion of the density. If you make the density if you compute the density profile of this state, of course you will find the pancake that we know, which represents the 2D gas, with a hole at the origin. So let's do the same. And let's call this the quasi-hole, in which you simply decide to put the product of the coordinates times the magic Laughlin polynomial. So this, we can call this also a variational wave function, although there is no variational parameter. You can make a drawing of the density, and of course nothing special happens. You have punched a hole right at the origin. Okay? Why not z cube? Let's do z cube, okay? If I do z cube, onto this, okay? That's what you propose. But then you see that this is exactly the Laughlin wave function, the same, where you have added one electron right at position 0, at the origin. Okay? You've added a factor. So it's coordinates z1, zn, and n+1 particle, and this particle is right at the origin. So you see that if you pile up 3 of these guys at the origin, then you are back to the original state, which means that the charge density of this guy at the origin should be exactly 1/3 of the electric charge, because you are back to the original state. So by this simple reasoning, it means that this guy has a charge which is plus E/3. Of course, there are many ways to check this. You can also, after all, this is an explicit formula, you can compute the density profile. You can integrate the density around the origin in a circle. You will find that this density tends exponentially quickly towards 1/3 as soon as the diameter of the region is larger than the magnetic length. So if you look at length scales larger than the magnetic length, then you see that there is a well-defined charge at the origin, which is 1/3. Okay?
Sorry, how do you apply the same argument on side 1 here? Then it's also assuming that you add some other particle at 0.
You just add electrons, that's all. Yes, yes. You make 3 holes, that's all. 3 electronic holes. And you can, of course, displace the electrons away from the origin by any power you like. So it's a variational wave function. You can compute the energy of this guy. So there is a finite energy cost to the creation of this state. But of course, it's it's well, okay. For Coulomb interaction, this is not an exact eigenstate. That's for sure. But then, as I mentioned last time, we have a trick at our disposal. It's an Hamiltonian whose ground state is exactly the Laughlin wave function. So let me remind you that any two-body interaction projected onto the lowest Landau level can be written as a sum of a pair interactions projected onto relative angular momentum m. And if we are dealing with spinless fermions, this m should be odd. And these VMs, it's a set of discrete numbers that we've called pseudo-potentials. So for Coulomb case, you can compute these numbers. So 1, 3, 5, and they are decreasing not very quickly with n. Their scale is given precisely by the Coulomb energy scale, of course. Okay? And if we just keep V1, so which means that our Hamiltonian becomes the sum of all projectors onto relative angular momentum 1. If you apply this guy onto the Laughlin wave functions, all relative angular momentums are at least 3, which means that this projector goes to 0. But then if we look at our hypothetical quasi-hole, then it's also zero energy state. Because of course there are still powers of 3 of all positions of the relative angular momentum. So this is also an exact eigenstate of this very special Hamiltonian. Of course, it's not a complete proof that this goes perfectly well if we deform the Hamiltonian till the Coulomb interaction, but at least it's an indication that it's not crazy. Fine. So the Laughlin ansatz was that there are fractional charges in this game. This is obtained by adding some flux. Okay, so we have, let's see, lower the density. But of course, if you are at such a filling 1/3, you can also increase the density, so there should be a quasi-electron in which instead of pushing the particles away from the origin, then you try to put them closer to the origin, which is something you cannot do at filling factor unity because all the levels are filled. In the case of filling factor unity, there is no way to increase the density because it's already maximal. Increasing the density means putting guys in a higher Landau level. Okay? But then at 1/3, you can create an excitation with an excess of density. And the proposal of Laughlin was, instead of putting powers of the z coordinate, let's put derivatives. So the idea is quite simple. If you look at individual orbitals, instead of increasing the power of z, which means putting the particles farther away, then you put them closer. If you do this applied to the 1/3 Laughlin function, wave function, this is again a variational wave function. It has an energy cost. So there is, if we believe that this has to do with an eigenstate of the true system, then there is a gap towards the creation of such guys. Okay. Let me slightly refine these ansatz. But then if you do this, then it's no longer an eigenstate of this special V1 Hamiltonian, simply because then with the derivatives there are pairs of particles in which the relative angular momentum is 1. So it's no longer, maybe it's a nice variational wave function, but anyway, it's no longer an exact eigenstate. So we have charge excitations. With a finite cost in energy, with an energy gap which is non-zero, given by the Coulomb energy scale. If you look at this guy and you make a plot of the charge density, then it's not as easy as the case of the quasi-electron, but then you find that, let me make a hand drawing, density in space, real space. So this quasi-electron, it has to do, it's only the origin which is special. And in fact, you see that there is an extra density of charge which has a ring type structure, which you cannot easily guess in this wave function. If you compute the charge, then you will not be surprised if I tell you that the charge of this extra particle is minus E/3. Of course, these quasi-particles, they are located at the origin, and then it's easy to find generalizations in which you put these particles anywhere in the plane. So for the quasi-hole, you decide to replace the product of Zi by Zi minus some big Z. So that's, of course, then it's obvious to guess that the quasi-hole will be located at the big Z coordinate. And you can do the same for the quasi-electron, in which you decide that you make the product of d/dz minus, that's the original choice of Löffling. I put a 2 here, which I will explain to you later. There is a very definite reason why there is a 2, minus Z star applied to 1/3. In which case you have states where the quasi-particle is located somewhere in the plane. Okay?
You don't change the Gaussian factor.
And I don't touch the Gaussian factor, absolutely. That's included in this psi. Okay. Sorry? Absolutely, only to the prefactor, absolutely. So you don't touch the Gaussian factor, absolutely. Then there is the normalization. It's absorbed in the normal. All these functions are not normalized. Absolutely, absolutely. I've decided not to write any normalization of these wave functions, but then the units are corrected in the normalization factor. So which means that it's... Yes, yes, it's with the magnetic length which is equal to unity. Yes, absolutely. 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 Okay, so let's see. So we have now... Yes? It's located in Z, that's why we put Z star. Okay. So we have a candidate state and a candidate excited states to describe the physics at 1/3. So that's a snapshot of inside the Löffling wave functions, as I told you. And so now we want to check these IDs. So we have trial wave functions, okay. There is certainly some truth if we believe that the V1 hardcore Hamiltonian is smoothly related to the Coulomb interaction. Then it means that maybe we are making good guesses for these states. But of course we want something to be more precise. And then I will propose you to look at something which is a bit theoretical, but which is extremely useful, is let's solve the many-body problem on the sphere. So now that's really something for theorists. This Landau level stuff, there is something which is very convenient, is that if you fix the area of the system, then there is a finite number of states. So without any truncation, the Hilbert space is of finite dimension. It's not like particle in a box, where even if the box has a finite size, then there is an infinite number of states. So we have to decide which geometry we will use with a finite area, and then we are directly led to a problem which is essentially linear algebra, diagonalize the matrix of the Hamiltonian, which is a finite dimensional matrix without any extra approximations. And that's certainly a good feature. So if you want to, so finite area, there are two popular geometries, one which is the sphere and the other which is the torus, which means periodic boundary conditions in the two directions, which is a bit tricky with a magnetic field because you cannot really have periodic boundary conditions on the two dimensions. So I will not spend much time explaining this. On the contrary, I will use a lot the spherical geometry, which is conceptually very nice. So let's put the 2D electron gas on a sphere with a perpendicular magnetic field, which means that the magnetic field should be perpendicular to the surface everywhere. So you cannot really do this because you need a magnetic monopole right in the center of the sphere, which doesn't exist. But anyway, for practical purposes, for theoretical purposes, there is no problem deciding that we will use a B which is perpendicular to the surface everywhere. So the problem of looking at the particle moving on a sphere with a perpendicular magnetic field was solved maybe first by Igor Tamm in the 30s, so that's a very old problem, and it was revived in the context of the quantum Hall effect by Haldane in the beginning of the 80s. So it's a bit tricky to have a field which is perpendicular to the sphere everywhere, to the surface of the sphere. So let me give you a few explanations about that. So there is a first phenomenon which is very interesting independently of the fractional quantum Hall effect, is that you cannot define a vector potential everywhere, because if we compute the flux of B through the sphere, if B is perpendicular everywhere, so this is non-zero, so it's a flux, okay? Okay, let me call this phi, okay? And so we cannot have B which is curl of A everywhere. So you should have at least several patches with different functions, vector potentials, defined in several patches. So this was clarified by Wu and Yang in a very famous series of papers, okay? And they show that you just need at least two. So a vector potential defined on the northern hemisphere and the vector potential defined on the southern hemisphere. Each of them will have locally a curl which is perpendicular to the sphere. And then you are allowed to do that provided in the region where they both are defined, they differ by a gauge transformation. So if you have a region of overlap in the definition, then this should be the gradient of something, which you can remove by a gauge transformation, but then you should realize that these two guys, they do not exist everywhere, and consequently, this gauge function does not exist everywhere. So now, if you compute the flux with this definition, you will find that so you have the flux of the northern part minus the flux of the southern part. Yes, that's B, okay. So let me go phi, which means that this is now the integral, the curve integral of A on the north. If you look at the way you go from the flux of the curl to the line integral, then there is a minus when you go to the southern hemisphere. And then now it means that this is just the curl integral of the gradient of this gauge transformation between the two patches, which means that if I have, let's see, a definition of the vector potential on the northern hemisphere, another definition on the southern hemisphere, and then the transition function right at the equator, then the curl integral of the transition function on the equator, it's just the difference of this gauge transformation when you make a full turn around the equator. Okay? And so that's fine. Absolutely. Absolutely. So now you can do quantum mechanics with these two vector potentials, and you will have eigenstates defined on the north and on the southern hemisphere related by this gauge change. So it's E over h bar, if I remember correctly, times the gauge transformation. If you want wave functions that are single valued, then it means that this difference should be, let's say if I write it like this, it should be 2 pi times an integer. If it is 2 pi times an integer, maybe it's h bar, then you see, okay, and that's difference of chi, okay, and this is this difference of chi, it's the flux. And this should be 2 pi times an integer, okay? Which means that phi should be 2 pi times an integer times h bar over E, which is an integer times E over h over E, which is the flux quantum. So everything is fine, provided the flux is quantized. Then you have to solve the Schrödinger equation on each hemisphere, and then the two functions are related simply by a gauge transformation. So that's the only peculiarity of the sphere geometry. So there are popular choices for the vector potential, and then you have to solve the eigenproblem. So I will just give you the formulas for the lowest Landau level states on the sphere. So they can be written in spherical coordinates. This is not a big surprise. So let me define u, which is cosine theta over 2, e to the I phi over 2, v sine of theta over 2, e to the minus phi over 2. These two quantities transform as as a spinor on the rotation on the sphere. And that's maybe it's possible to construct the theory of irreducible representation of SU2 using polynomials in these U and V. So it's no surprise that they can be used to construct the wave functions. And in fact, the lowest Landau level, it's spanned by a set of wave functions, which I call phi S M, which is U to S plus M V S minus M, where M goes from minus S to plus S. And this S, which stands for spin, between quotes, it's not, of course, the real spin. This S, it's simply 1/2 of the number of flux quantums through the sphere. This N, the number of flux quantums through the sphere. So you see that this quantity S is an integer of half-integer number, and then you have a definite set of functions spanning the lowest Landau level. So these are U to the power 2S, U 2S minus 1 V1, U 2S minus 2 V2, and so on, till you reach V to the 2S. So I will forget about the normalization of this wave function. It's not that important. And you see that there is 2S plus 1 states. 2S plus 1 state, which means n phi plus 1 states, where n phi is the number of flux quanta through the sphere. There are also excited states, and in fact, all these guys can be written in terms of, there is a generalization of the spherical harmonics. If you look at the motion of a particle, in the absence of magnetic flux, we know that it's the spherical harmonics that describes the eigenstate of the one particle motion. And then there is a generalization of these functions when there is non-zero flux, which is described in the Wu and Yang paper. Let me draw the degeneracy of these states. So the lowest Landau level has a degeneracy 2S plus 1, which is n phi plus 1. Then the next Landau level has a degeneracy which is 2S plus 1 plus 1, which means so 2S plus 3, and so on. So in fact, this S can be, it's the value. You can construct an angular momentum operator, which I will call L, which acts on these basis states, and it's the good way to index these states. So the lowest Landau level corresponds to a set of states with an angular momentum which is exactly S. The next Landau level corresponds to L equal S plus 1, and so on. So it's not the same angular momentum as in the absence of the field. It has a more complicated expression. Anyway, there is a symmetry. That's the symmetry of the rotation on the sphere. And you can classify states with respect to their value of the angular momentum. So now the strategy, if you want to do a complete theoretical analysis of the many body problem, is that, okay, let's take the lowest Landau level. Let's compute the matrix elements in second quantization of the Coulomb Hamiltonian in this set of states. Let's put a finite number of particles in a finite number of flux quanta, and so we get a finite dimensional matrix. Let's diagonalize it. we can classify the eigenstates with respect to the total angular momentum, and let's see if we understand something. Okay? So there are several advantages of doing this, in the sense that there are no uncontrolled approximations. You don't do any bizarre truncation, whatever. There are limitations. First, of course, the number of particles should be quite small. Which means in practice that it's limited to, let's be optimistic, less than 20. That's very optimistic, okay? There is an approximation which is built in this scheme, is that we are just projecting onto the lowest Landau level. This may not necessarily be true, especially if we go to weak fields. As I mentioned, we can imagine that you have replicas of the same phenomenon you find in the lowest Landau levels in the higher Landau levels. But this happens for smaller magnetic field, where the approximation of just projecting onto one level is certainly worse and worse. Okay? So this is an approximation. But then that's all, because we have a finite dimensional Hilbert space, as I advertised. So no truncation, we just look at the spectrum. Okay, so now, fine. So we will look at the spectrum of the Coulomb problem. What are the predictions of the Laughlin wave function? Okay. Okay, let me write this, then we will make the break. So on the sphere, how to write down the Laughlin wave function on the sphere? Let's first redo the calculation of the state with all field orbitals. Okay. So I take the lowest Landau wave functions, I put an electron into each of them. But now the wave functions are no longer z to the m, but it's us plus m, vs minus m. But then it's still a Slater determinant, and it's still a Vandermonde determinant. It's very easy to compute, and you find that complete filling of one shell is given by product of IA Vj minus Uj Vi, like this. That's simply the calculation of the Vandermonde determinant. There is a feature that you see which is quite nice, is that it's clearly a state which is invariant under rotations. Because this UV, it's a spinor under the rotations on the sphere. And this combination, it's essentially the determinant of this guy. So it's an SU2 invariant. So this state has L equals 0. It has angular momentum 0. But that's pretty obvious because we have decided to occupy exactly all angular momentum states. Fine, so that's easy. What about Laughlin? Well, Laughlin, it's also very simple because we guess immediately that we just put this factor with a power 3. There is no Gaussian whatever, it's even simpler. So by just inspection, you see that it's also a singlet because it still involves this combination uv minus vu, so that's fine. It has also 0 angular momentum. And that's good because that's exactly what we expect from a liquid state. It should fill the sphere in a perfectly uniform way if it's a liquid. So it's completely round, so it has 0 angular momentum. So that's good. Now, if you look at this wave function, you see that to create such a guy, you need a very special relation between the flux and the number of particles. Indeed, the filling factor, okay? We argued on the disk geometry that the wave function has a filling factor which is 1/3, essentially by looking at the density of the state. Here, let's look at this guy. If we have a state which is in the lowest Landau level, let's compute the total degree of the wave function. because it's a polynomial in these u and v's, okay? So if I look at a one-body state, so this is S plus M V S minus M. So the total degree is 2S. If now you have NE electrons living on the lowest Landau level, it means that the total degree of the wave function for n electrons, it should be then 2s times the number of electrons. So now if you look at this guy, let's compute the total degree. So there is a factor of 3. Then there is the product of I less than j, which means 1/2 of NE minus 1. And then inside each factor, there is an additional power of 2 because it's quadratic form. And this should be 2s times the number of electrons. So this 2s, now you simplify a bit this. You see that the number of flux quanta through the sphere, which is also 2s, should be 3 times NE minus 1. So you see that the filling factor is 1/3, but there is a small offset. Okay? So if now you look at the spectrum for n electrons on the sphere, taking into account this offset, you should see something that has to do with the Laughlin state if I take the Coulomb interaction. And I claim that this is indeed what happens, and then we will make a break. This is a spectrum for 13 electrons, my personal best, okay, using exactly this relation and the number of flux quantum coming from 13 electrons. So these are eigenstates, so this is the energy value, okay, and the states are classified by the total angular momentum. And you find that indeed the ground state has 0 angular momentum, so it's a state which is a fluid, likely, very likely. Certainly it's a ground state which is round. And you see that, at least we can guess plausibly, that there is a gap towards excited states. And then you see that there is a very nice collective mode which is very well separated from a higher lying continuum of just a mess of states. Okay. So that's fine, because certainly we guess that on top of a given state, you can probably create neutral pairs of quasi-electron, quasi-hole states, and maybe they are giving rise to bound state with some dispersion. So this is certainly a candidate to be a bound state of these quasi-electron, quasi-holes, and there is a gap. So it looks as if the Laughlin state has to do with this. We can, of course, make the comparison of what happens. So this is for the Coulomb interaction, the more or less realistic Coulomb interaction. You can, of course, do the same calculation for the V1 hardcore model. Same Hilbert space, you just change the interaction. And, of course, you recover exactly the Laughlin interaction. That's an interesting test of your code, by the way, especially because provided you take the good basis states, if you develop this, then coefficients are all integers, which is a very nice test because, of course, for the real Coulomb eigenstate, these guys are not integers. Okay. Yes, yes, absolutely. This is called a magnetoroton state, absolutely. You see that there is a minimum in the collective mode for a well-defined value of the wave vector.
In terms of a very simple kind of wave semiconductor tissue, can I think that if I excite the particle,
Yes.
the zero momentum state,
Yes.
because they get some high momentum to the next momentum,
Yes, absolutely.
then wait when electrons all bind together by
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is really the picture that happens. Absolutely. The two pairs, the quasi-electron, quasi-hole pair, is widely separated when K is large enough. And then it becomes, this limiting energy is equal to the sum of the energies of the quasi-electron and the quasi-hole.
But you said that
there are absolutely there are more and more minimum. Yes, it's a complicated stuff. Absolutely. Okay, let me make a break now, and then we discuss the quasi-particles from these calculations.